Okay. Shall we continue? Is this the right time? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Right now, I can't see the chat because I put my notes on the keyboard, so I can no longer see whether someone has a question, but maybe just go ahead. Well, in some way, kind of, I'll ask in between again whether there are questions anyway. Okay. Yep. So we've got to 56, did some meditation on that. So now 57. It's like I said, it may be helpful to also look at the commentaries. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how we got from one aspect to the next, or one argument to the next. Anyway, so 57, it says, a fool's desire does not arise only for those with good qualities. How can reason prevent those involved in it without reason? Here it's saying that a foolish person also has desire for someone with negative qualities. It's bizarre where, well, the kind of attachment, craving we have. I mean, again, of course, it's quite subjective, good qualities, negative qualities, but there is although it's subjective and it's conventional, but of course there is a way in which we can say in general, positive qualities, negative qualities in general, there is some consensus in the sense that we usually say that qualities that cause suffering, or qualities means certain characteristics that cause suffering, they're intended to, I mean, that they're intentionally negative, motivated by negative motivation, and they cause suffering, that they're negative. And then those that cause happiness, they are positive. Now, again, of course, what type of happiness are we talking about? Long-term happiness? Well, yes, those who cause long-term happiness, long-term satisfaction, those we call positive, and those that cause suffering, cause problems, in particular long-term problems, well, they're considered to be negative. That's how we apply positive, negative. And since we all want to be happy and we don't want to suffer, there's like a common consensus in terms of good qualities, negative qualities. So a person who's very selfish, etc., is considered to be negative, etc. But then there's a large scale of qualities that are totally subjective. I mean, one person would like a quiet woman who doesn't speak her mind, would see that as a good quality. Another person likes an assertive, dominant woman, and sees that as a good quality. Now, that there is no consensus in the sense that it's just a matter of preference. Same is true for a man, a quiet man, and I don't know, an obedient man, if you like, versus a dominant man, and so forth. Now, there are differences, but here when it says a fool's desire, like if there's someone like who's really selfish and which in general would be considered negative, being very selfish, being very egotistical, who's very, I don't know, proud, arrogant, and so forth. Well, those are usually considered to be negative qualities, but even then, some people generate desire for those. So some fools would be considered fools have a desire for someone with negative qualities. So how can reason present those involved in it without reason? Now, our desire, our craving usually doesn't accept much, or it doesn't work based on reasoning. Therefore, he's saying, how can we actually apply reason to something that doesn't operate on reasoning? Well, to the attachment itself, we cannot, but we apply reasoning to minds we then describe as antidotes. Those are antidotes. So when these other minds, there are these certain types of antidotes, just as a poison. If you have a poison and there's an antidote that can actually neutralize the poison, well, likewise here, with regard to the antidote, you apply reason. And craving, of course, it also applies reason. I mean, but not correct reason. Like, oh, I like this person because I can't be without them because. Now, the mind always operates on some form of reason. Can't live without them. I want to be with them because. However, this reasoning usually doesn't, or actually hardly ever, really accord with reality. No, it doesn't. I mean, hardly ever. I don't need to say it doesn't accord with reality. It's always an exaggerated version of what's actually there, shutting out other aspects and totally subjective, believing them to be objective, and so forth. Now, to counteract that is to generate a mind which is just as forceful as the craving itself, which is why I'd like you to take any insight to a more emotional level, to a more, well, to a deeper kind of level, which can then serve as an antidote. If you have another mind that works in the opposite way, that understands that all this doesn't make sense, that in actuality our attachment um, operates in the way prescribed earlier, well, then the desire just naturally, well, gets neutralized. It naturally grows weaker. Okay, that's the only way to really reduce desire, attachment, and of course, eventually to realize how phenomena actually exist. And with that mind, we overcome the basic misconception, which ordinarily gives rise to attachment, but since it's no longer there, it can no longer give rise to attachment. Now, this is the way to totally eliminate craving and attachment and so forth. But before we get there, before we can actually generate a wisdom, develop a wisdom that understands things correctly, we need to create some space in the mind. We need to create the conditions, the causes and conditions for the understanding of ultimate reality to actually arise. And that is by reducing our afflictive emotions. And the way to reduce them is the way prescribed here, in particular with regard to attachment. All right. Now, the next verse then, here it's interesting what is the argument that could be set forth here. This is very typical for India, where it says women commit suicide when their husbands die, but men do not do that. I mean, that was true. It's even nowadays in India, it's seen as a quality in some areas, that a woman who well, if a husband dies, then when her husband dies, she throws herself, she commits suicide by jumping in the funeral pyre, by burning herself to death. I mean, it's like the worst type of suicide anyway. So I think it's called sati or something. I don't remember now. But anyway, there's this practice. And here arguing, well, a woman is so special because it's reasonable to have attachment because she would sacrifice her life for a man. So that's the kind of argument given. And in 58, it then says, well, as long as she knows no other, she will remain with you. As with disease, women should always be kept from opportunity. Ooh. But man is the same. So actually now he's arguing, of course, saying here is kind of like the attachment, saying, well, I should be with women, because women are so, they would actually give up their life if I'm no longer around. But of course, I could say the same, arguing here, if I argued with a woman, saying, well, a heterosexual woman, saying, well, men, they can be so great, they work really hard, they do this, that, and the other. So it makes sense to be, they're faithful to you, they look after you, and then saying, well, as long as he knows no other, he will remain with you. But as with disease, man should always be kept from opportunity. God, it sounds as bizarre both ways, man or woman. I mean, it's not meant to be harsh in that way. We were all, whether men or women, it's true for all of us. But this idea that someone will always be with us and will not be unfaithful, well, that's just not unrealistic. It's just not realistic. So it's therefore not appropriate to desire a man or a woman just because we believe they will always desire us. That's just not realistic. Their interest in us may wane. And as humans, we just need to be kept from opportunity to get involved with someone else. I mean, it's just how the mind works. We like to believe, oh, it's me, I'm so special. And that's what they know, I'm so special. And since I'll always be special, they'll always be with me. But like as we did before, we went through the analysis. Well, we believe another person to be so special. It's just a projection by the mind, and that won't always last. I mean, we're special to someone. We believe someone to be hugely special until we get to know them better. The attachment, the craving, it slowly, slightly waned. I mean, it kind of disappears. It grows weaker. And then suddenly we see all these negative qualities we previously chose not to see. And trouble starts. Well, all our expectations that we that we had, it goes against all our expectations. We're greatly disappointed, and it causes a lot of trouble. Which is why the stronger our craving, the harder it is to make a partnership work, because we have all these expectations that are just not in accordance with reality. Our expectations are in accordance with our projection of that person. And the same is true. We believe them. Yeah, we notice they think we're wonderful. They believe we are the greatest person in the world, and we kind of like that. We may also realize they don't really see me for who I am, but at some point, this infatuation will weaken, and they will see us for who we are, and we have faults, etc. And they may look elsewhere. Okay, so no matter what we believe, they think we're so great. Well, it'll wear off sooner or later. I mean, not in all cases. I mean, of course, there are partnerships that work, but they're not based on that incredible craving that is explained here. That is just so harmful. Okay, and then it goes on to say 59. In old age, one dislikes what one did during youth. Why would the liberated not be extremely saddened by it? But actually, that's not really the case. I mean, it's like someone argues, well, when you grow older, you understand, you realize what you've done wrong, that you will be the wiser, or you will be wiser than before. You just realize what you've done wrong, but that's just not true. In old age, we're not necessarily disgusted about what we've done in the past, because that would mean that the liberated beings would be terribly disgusted about what they've done before. And then, I mean, first of all, in old age, we're not necessarily the wiser, and we're not necessarily disgusted about what we've done. And furthermore, well, arhats, it's more like, yeah, well, you're not disgusted by it or saddened by it. It's just what it is, and can't undo the mistakes, and is rather a cause to generate more compassion for others. So therefore, well, this hoping that we learn from our mistakes, well, we do in some cases, but oftentimes we feel like, oh, I will never have that kind of unrealistic expectations in any situation when it comes to being in a partnership. And then 2-3 weeks later, we'll meet someone and the same kind of behavioral pattern arises again. So we don't necessarily learn. And also, considering we've done this over endless lifetimes, we've done the same things, we've made the same mistakes, and we do over and over again. It's not that we necessarily learn. And the way to learn is not to give in to the craving, but really look at the craving, get to know the craving, get to know the mind, and not be carried away by the objects that this craving suggests that they exist. And we believe in the appearances to our mind. We believe in whatever appears to the mind, the other minds, in other words, they believe in that and follow after it. And that's our mistake. Then 60, sorry. Those without desire have no pleasure. Someone may argue, well, without desire, there's no pleasure. I mean, what would we have? What kind of pleasure would we have? So this is a huge argument. Arguing that desire is good, because what would we have if we didn't have desire? How can there be pleasure without desire? But actually, those without desire have no pleasure, nor do those not foolish have it. Those without desire have no pleasure, nor do those not foolish have it. How can there be pleasure for one whose mind constantly strays? So how does those not foolish have desire? Or do those not foolish have desire? How come there are desires? Wait, I'm confused here. So we believe it's the greatest pleasure to be with women, to be with men. That's one of the greatest pleasures. I mean, even nowadays, so much emphasis put on relationships. That is truly amazing. Not that I'm thinking there's anything wrong with relationships, not at all. I mean, just because I'm a nun, well, I've chosen that way of life for myself, and so have other monks and nuns, but that's not the best way of life. It's just for me personally, it's the best way of life. For other people, it's just not appropriate. Spiritually, it doesn't benefit them. However, in my case, considering that to be well, beneficial, and I would have definitely been in a relationship if I hadn't chosen that. Well, that would have been the second best thing, and there's a lot we can learn from relationships and so forth. But one thing I noticed, and that's incredible, ever since I've come home to Germany to spend time here, and being exposed, of course, more to the modern world, more than I am in Dharamsala, as in like, well, people watching TV, people's life. I'm surrounded by people who are not in the Dharma. And the emphasis on relationships. Oh, how important. You're not complete unless you have a partner. And I remember, especially when I was younger, I was in my 20s, in my early 20s, and being a nun and going to Germany, it was like, whoa, it was overwhelming. Because, of course, biologically, my body was telling me the same, being with a partner, etc. So there was that. And externally, everything was suggesting that. Now, that is really interesting. This sense you're only complete if you have a partner. That is also almost insulting. Well, it is insulting. Like, how can you only be complete with another person? I mean, why can I not be complete the way I am and still be in a partnership and learn from it? But also people seeking relationships because they feel they're incomplete without them. And that's just kind of reflects a lack of self-confidence, a lack of understanding of what we're capable to do. So I think we should also free ourselves from that perception. Of course, there's a lot of advantages with relationships, but it's also a lot of work. It's hard work to be with another person. It's hard enough to be with ourselves, but also to be with another person and to make the most out of it, to learn, to learn qualities such as forgiveness, love, acceptance, tolerance, and so forth. That's what a relationship should be, but not to expect that we become more complete. Anyway, this is just one thing I noticed, this very strong emphasis in the West. Of course, in India, it's there too, but I was just not exposed to it, just living in a slightly different environment. And the Tibetan environment is just not like that because they have a lot of ordained people. So anyway, all right. Now, I'm still not sure about this, nor do those not foolish have it. Those who are foolish have it. Those without desire have no pleasure. That's what someone assumes. Nor do those not foolish have it. I don't know, I forgot. So those without desire for women do not have pleasure focusing on them. Moreover, those who are sensible do not have desire. Since that which is pleasurable thought of as pleasure due to desire, the cause of the pleasure is desire. I apologize, I'm just confused about this verse. So those who are foolish, I don't know the foolish, I don't get it. I need a moment to sit down, and I don't have that right now. Okay, so anyway, I don't get that right now. But the point is that those without desire, well, there's a sense, those who are liberated do not experience pleasure while focusing on women, since this type of pleasure, of course, was caused by the rude misconception, and they've overcome that. And how can there be pleasure for one whose mind constantly strays? So how can there actually be pleasure without that misconception? How can the mind really be well, pleasurable? How can we enjoy anything if our mind is full of misconceptions? All right, I'll get back to you on the second line. Then 61. Here it's about, of course, sexual satisfaction. You cannot have intercourse constantly with a woman to match your attentiveness to her. So with regard to our attentiveness towards a woman, to match your attentiveness, you can't have constant intercourse. That's just not going to work. So why keep her possessively with the thought she's mine and no one else? So where's this possessiveness come from? Or in a case of a man, likewise, I mean, to match our attentiveness, I mean, you can't have sex all the time. That doesn't work. And so basically, because she's mine, so I have to be around her all the time. I have to have sex all the time. It doesn't work. I mean, we spend some time together and then we spend some time apart. So why this possessiveness, like thinking this is mine? And that's much stronger with a woman than it is with other things. We may happily share, or with a man for that matter. And I'm not saying we should all kind of share around our partners. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just kind of questioning this sense of this is mine, this possessiveness. So the stronger the attachment, the stronger this is mine. And it may lead, I mean, I think wars have started because of that possessiveness. No, she is mine. I'm going to fight against the king who wants to take away my wife, whatever. So that in that way, this attachment can lead to incredible aggression and incredible anger. So therefore, actually, we can't be with this person, and we'd probably get bored being with that person all the time. And still, we feel like no one else can be with around this person. I mean, this possessiveness. And it can go to such a degree that women are locked away and cannot go out and not allowed to work and not allowed to do this because of that possessiveness. So, yeah, who is free having that? I mean, feeling free. It is just, when we talk about freedom in Buddhism, it's less about freedom such as you live, I don't know, in a huge space where there's nothing to obstruct you. Or it's not about that. It's not about political freedom. It's about inner freedom. And having this kind of possessiveness, well, you're definitely far from being free. All right. So if desire were pleasurable, there would be no need for women or for men. No need for men or women. If desire itself, well, we got enough of it. So if desire were pleasurable, that was the argument before. Well, the previous two verses before, it was like, well, desire is pleasurable. And we have that sense, oh, if we didn't have desire, we wouldn't be happy in life. Then the next verse was about, well, if you're liberated, you have so much more pleasure. And if you're not liberated and you have this desire, the mind strays all the time. How can there be pleasure? And then it went on to say also this kind of possessiveness. It doesn't really make sense. You can't have sex all the time, but why would you keep this person so close to you? You can't always be with them, can't always satisfy your desire, and still you hold on to her. And in actuality, if desire were really pleasurable, well, we wouldn't need anything. We only need the desire, and that we got plenty. Pleasure is not regarded as something of which to get rid of. So, therefore, desire is not pleasure, because we need to overcome desire, but we don't need to overcome pleasure. Pleasure is not something, we don't try to get rid of pleasure. We try to get rid of attachment for a pleasure that actually isn't a real type of pleasure. That was the whole argument in the second chapter. That is only a short absence of something worse, of the worst type of suffering, and therefore we call it happiness. But there's some true happiness, the way also, well, Michael, he shared with us this kind of description of like a type of happiness that is contentment, that is lasting, that comes from deep within, that is not dependent on external factors, that does not get us addicted, that arises basically, well, as I said, in the mind. It's not externally, it's dependent on external factors, whatever chemicals are involved. That's something for a biologist or chemist to analyze. But the point is that here we're looking for kind of happiness that is a reliable type, is the spiritual type of happiness, and we're not saying we shouldn't experience that, but through craving, we will never experience this type of happiness. So pleasure is something we need. In fact, we stress pleasure all the time, joy, happiness. If you practice goes well and you have a sense of happiness and satisfaction, great. If you're forcing yourself, you're dissatisfied, if you're unhappy doing this practice, don't do it. Don't do it. That's not the right way to go about it. You can't force yourself. All right. Then 63. Even in intercourse with a woman, pleasure arises from other factors. What sensible person would say it is caused just by this lover? So even intercourse with a woman is not merely the result of the woman. For otherwise, those with and without desire, they should experience pleasure at that time. So even someone who's no desire at that time, if the pleasure of the intercourse would be with this woman or with this man, everyone should have it. So of course you need to have the wish to engage in the act. You have to you need sexual organs that enable you, and so there's so many factors. So in fact, if someone is forced, I believe the commentary mentions like a monk who's forced by a woman. I mean, it's not described as rape, but could be that still like a monk who actually wants to keep celibate, but then a woman is basically forcing herself on this monk until, due to the physical constitution of a man, there's a reaction of that and a sexual intercourse takes place, would suffer from that because they don't have the wish to do that. They want to keep their vows. Or in the case of a man who gets raped, in the case of a man. So if there was intercourse with this man was definitely pleasurable, it was just dependent on that person. Well, being raped should be pleasurable. So there's so many other aspects that are needed, which should show us that that act itself is not pleasant in itself. Therefore, the pleasure, any pleasure, is dependent on so many factors. And usually we believe there just to be one factor. Again, our craving seems to suggest all I need is to be with this woman. That's the kind of suggestion that's what this mind makes us believe. And therefore, that's all we do. We crave for that, not realizing there's so much more involved. Again, interdependence. Our afflictive emotions are not in tune with interdependence, in that we usually believe there's no cause, or if there is a cause, it's just a single cause. It's a single aspect. So in the case of sexual desire, it's just this woman that makes me happy. But of course, forgetting there's so many other factors. Okay. Blinded by desire, they do not see sensuality's faults, like a leper scratching. Those free from desire see the infatuated as suffering, like the leper. So being blinded by and giving into desire is like a leper who scratches his wounds, causing them to bleed, to ooze, etc. So those who are liberated realize that those with desire are like lepers, basically having this debilitating disease called the afflictive emotions, and then doing constantly. So when this homeless says, he has this very profound statement. He says, when you want to be selfish wisely, because we're like having this disease, which is having these afflictive emotions right now. That's our disease. It's not in the nature of our mind, but still it's there. And due to that, we continually do that which destroys our happiness. Although we want happiness out of craving, out of self-cherishing, we want happiness, but we're not wisely going about it. In fact, we create more suffering for ourselves. So that's basically what it says in 64. 65, during a famine, the destitute, tormented by hunger, bear what occurs. This is how all the infatuated behave when they are with women. So this is interesting. We're like that. We're like in a famine and we're just so used to it. We don't know any better and we're totally okay with it. So when you're in a famine, when you don't have enough food and you're hungry, you're able to bear great difficulties for the sake of a little bit of food. So here, likewise, when we're infatuated by another person, we behave like such a destitute person. we were like a little bit, oh, I think the woman or the man just smiles at us, and we're like, oh, okay. It's bizarre. We would never ordinarily be satisfied by that, but because we're so infatuated, we settle for very little. And again, it's just saying, not saying it's bad to be with another person. All that is not, it's not what this is saying. It's saying, watch out. The stronger your craving, the stronger your suffering. So watch out for that craving. Watch it, get to know it, and realize that it's fooling you. It's fooling you. It's presenting to your reality that has got nothing to do with reality. And so, yeah, you'll become like someone who just after a small piece of food. I mean, just the smallest thing gives you like this wow, and then that causes more craving. All right. And then 66, through arrogance, one may be attached even to one's privy, like one's bathroom, one's toilet. Anyone infatuated with a woman will be jealous of others. So someone with great arrogance may be attracted even to something as lowly as low as a toilet, a trivia toilet. So likewise, someone who's infatuated with a woman is baselessly jealous of other men. Okay, so if we're arrogant, if we have a lot of arrogance, the smallest things get us to be proud of something that there's nothing to be proud of. And likewise, when we're infatuated with a woman, ordinarily we get along with others, there's no problem, but suddenly we dislike everyone else around us because they could be potential competitors. So our relationship with other men, or with other women for that matter, well, they suffer because just as an arrogant person can be arrogant about something, a piece of stone, if you like, well, someone who's infatuated with another man or a woman, their jealousy will drive them to resent others. So they basically kind of become pretty lonely in their existence, as in like others are competitors. Other men in the case of women, sorry, other men in the case of men, other women in the case of women, and so forth. We're good with the time. Yeah, I want to do a meditation soon. Maybe just let me read those last three. It is reasonable for confusion and anger about the unclean to occur. It is not at all reasonable for desire to occur. So it makes more sense to be confused and upset about that which is not clean. For instance, when we step into excrements, I mean, it kind of makes more sense because it's not hygienic. It's could be, well, could cause us diseases. So that makes more sense than to have desire for the unclean. And this is not talking about the body of another person. It just isn't clean in itself. I mean, it shows that the poo of another person, we wouldn't want to step into it. And still, when craving arises, suddenly this other body appears totally pure, male or female. If except to some people a pot of filth is objectionable, why would one not think objectionable that from which the filth comes? Now, with the exception of some people who are maybe not in their right mind, there may be some weird people, but usually if we find a vessel with excrement or vomit, we find it disgusting. I mean, anyone, if you put a nice pot with some beautiful golden vessel with some excrement and vomit on your mantelpiece, I mean, I don't know, probably most people would consider that to be disgusting. So why do we not have a problem when these things are in the body, but think of it as disgusting when they come out of it? I mean, they're basically vomit is inside another person, and the excrements are too. But at the moment of desire, it's like Aryadeva says, it's just a bag full of filth. I mean, what I'm saying is, of course, in and of itself, it's neither filth nor is it attractive, but we live this life of contradiction. On one hand, we're so disgusted by it, and of course on an hygienic level it makes sense, but then if there's a body, we think of it as totally pure. So this purity that just comes from the attachment, again, let's question our own desire, our own craving. And then it says, clean things are looked upon as the most worthless of all. What intelligent person would say that it is clean? So clean things like flowers and clean clothes should actually be considered unclean if they were in contact with an unclean person. So clean things are looked upon as the most worthless. Actually, if they were in touch with another person, it's actually, I mean, usually we don't say they're clean. Like if another person has worn socks or underwear, we'd never say they're clean. Just the sweet water of a river, well, when it comes in contact with the sea, well, it becomes salty. So in the same way, actually the clothes of another person, I mean, how can we consider that to be clean? Our bodies are not in the nature of being clean. And again, it goes back to the idea that it's just having this body, which is a result of a misconception and negative emotions. And then lastly, before we start meditating, last verse, whoever has lived in a privy and without it would not have survived. In such a downworm, arrogance arises only through stupidity. So we've lived basically, well, we spent time in our mother's womb, and that's definitely not well, it's definitely a place with substances in it, which usually we would think disgusting. So we basically survived on these juices of a woman's body, and usually, like that's what I'm saying. Like usually, we consider them to be unclean. So what is this? So it's only due to stupidity that we feel arrogant about, like saying, "Wow, I was drinking these juices." I mean, like saying that. I mean, that's really stupid to think, "Oh, I'm so special because I drank all these juices." That we usually consider these, liquids in the body that we consider to be disgusting. Usually. So anyway, now we'll meditate on this. And just to summarize, I mean, it is kind of intense what they're talking about, but it's just reminding us. And again, it's very important to meditate on that, to take this to a deeper level, to a level where we get in touch with our own craving and realize the reality it projects. It's got nothing to do with reality. And projecting a distorted version of how things exist is one of the causes we suffer, one of the causes we do the craziest things. All right, now let's do some meditation on those last 10 verses. And again, we start with some breathing meditation. Now try to recognize within yourself a type of craving and attachment that has a sense of possessiveness when it comes to another person, this feeling of he or she is mine. If we don't have that with a person, we may even take an inanimate object that we feel it belongs to us. Why are we unable to share that with others? If actually we can't always enjoy the object at all times. And also the sense that desire brings pleasure to our life. Does it feel to you as if your own craving and your own desire bring happiness, and that if we didn't have craving, we didn't have desire, we wouldn't have much happiness? It actually doesn't make sense, since a liberated person is free from craving, but experiences an everlasting sense of deep satisfaction and contentment that is not dependent on any external factors. How can we experience true pleasure, true happiness, lasting happiness, if our mind constantly strays from one object of desire to the next? On top of that, if just having craving were a cause for happiness, for well-being, well, then we didn't need other men, other women, or any object of desire for that matter, since the craving itself would be enough. True pleasure, true happiness can only be experienced when we overcome craving. And we believe that the object of our craving is all we need to experience happiness. forgetting how many other factors are needed for happiness to arise. Therefore, Aryadeva says that having a craving, having this kind of desire, it's like having a disease. That causes wounds to cover our entire body. And instead of allowing these wounds to heal, we give in to our craving, our desire. It's just like scratching these wounds and causing them to bleed and ooze. The stronger our craving, the more destitute we become. Like a hungry person fighting for a little piece of food. We bear incredible hardships. Taking away our time and energy to pursue the object of our craving. Due to jealousy and possessiveness, it may destroy our relationship with other people. In particular, when it comes to sexual desire, desire for the body of another person, it is actually filled with substances that ordinarily we consider to be dirty and filthy. It's like a vessel with excrement and vomit. Why do we now have a problem with these substances when they're in the body of a person? So now to conclude, whatever insights you've come to with regard to your own craving and attachment, just focus your mind on it single-pointedly for some time to internalize this insight further so that it affects your craving and so forth. Okay. All right. Now we've come to the next verse to continue reading before we continue with the meditation. Now, someone may argue that the body is definitely clean, that the body is clean because we can wash it and we can remove dirt from it. But then Aryadeva says, well, no means whatsoever will purify the inside of the body. The efforts you make towards the outside do not match those towards the inside. Now, we're actually, doing a lot in terms of cleaning the body, cleaning inside and outside of our body. So even the inside, traditionally in India, inside and outside means more like to do with the body, as in like outside, inside, outside, like washing the body, not removing the excrements that are actually totally left from the body or gone from the body. We spend less time with those, but washing the body, so anything that touches the skin, we spend a lot of time doing that. And then nowadays you have detoxification. Well, in the past they had ablutions, called ablutions and washings and so forth. So ablutions were meant to purify the body from the inside. Nowadays we have colon cleansing, detoxification, and all these kind of measurements. And there's a sense we're actually totally cleaning the body. So you only drink juice for a whole week, and then you take like a laxative, and then you cleanse. There's the sense, oh, I totally cleansed my body. But of course, that's just an illusion. No matter what we do, there are no means whatsoever that will totally purify the body. So the skin, the body inside. So the efforts we make towards the outside do not match those towards the inside. So we spend a lot more time towards the outside. I mean, to totally get rid of all the garbage we leave behind, we're not that interested. It shows, obviously, we flush it down the toilets and that it. We're not concerned. And in ancient India, you would just leave it basically wherever you went to the bathroom, because there were no toilets at the time. Now, the point is, therefore, we don't care. Once it's left our body, we're not interested in cleaning any further. But we're so obsessed about, of course, cleaning the body and believe it to be clean, which is a total illusion in terms of what we consider to be clean anyway. If, it says then in verse 72, if like leprosy, being full of urine, were not common to all, those full of urine, just like lepers, would be shunned by everyone. So, in other words, if only some men or some women, so in terms of our objects of desire, whether they're men or women, so If only some men or some women, they were full of urine and other unclean substances, well, these men or women, they would be shunned like lepers. However, being unclean is something that, as everyone is, that's common to all of us. We all have these bodies. So to the highly realized, it's actually explained in the commentaries, all women are precious, but not because they're clean. To someone who's highly realized, and you can tell, of course, even the only contact we have with Buddhist society is usually, well, Buddhist society, or maybe Thai and Burmese. And it oftentimes seems that there's not the same respect given to women that we may see in other society. I mean, that's our perception. So I'm not sure that's really always the case, but yeah, we sometimes get the feeling that women are not really, they don't have the same position as men. That's definitely the case, and they're not treated the same way. But actually, this does not reflect Buddhist ideas. I think it's really important to understand the behavior of ordinary people does not reflect the behavior of those who really brought Buddhism into their lives. And if we observe the lamas, the great beings, I've never felt treated any different to a man. In fact, one of my teachers, he was an amazing practitioner. He was a great practitioner. In fact, after he passed away, he stayed in the clear light for about a week. That's when people really understood his level of attainment or his level of realizations. But even before that, in class, actually, I was not supposed to sit in front of the monks, but I kind of sat towards the side so I could hear better, because of course my Tibetan was not as good as my Tibetan classmates' Tibetan, and I struggled, especially initially, to understand everything. And I sat kind of at the side, and at some point it didn't work out, so I was in the back. And this particular teacher said, no, let her sit in the front. So even I sat in front of the monks, he said, well, never mind, that's not important. Important is that everyone understands. So he had no issue with me as a woman, and he treated me just the same. So really, all of my teachers, I never got the impression that they treated me any differently, in that they saw me as just another human being. And so to the highly realized, women are precious, but it's nothing to do with their bodies, seeing them as clean. But there's a difference between cherishing women, considering them to be precious and important, versus craving them. So we shouldn't justify our craving for women with the fact that they're cherished by sages, by the great beings. So there's a huge difference. Respect a woman, respect a man for who they are, for their mental abilities and so forth, but not cherishing them for, well, believing them to be, well, cherishing them as well, like having a side of cherishing, which is actually mixed with craving. And so there's this difference. There's a huge difference, in fact, of course, obviously. Therefore, as it says in 72, I've given a little bit more of explanation here, but actually we're all the same in being full of urine. So if that was a problem, we should all be shunned, because we're all the same and that our bodies are unclean. But cherishing people is not cherishing them for their body, but for their mental abilities. Okay. So yeah, that's 72. 73. Just as someone, okay, this is funny. Just as someone lacking a part is delighted with a substitute nose, desire holds that impurity is remedied by flowers and so forth. I kind of makes me laugh. This verse, it talks about, we believe, like someone may argue, well, actually a woman's body is beautiful because whatever smells there are, they can be remedied by pure substances such as creams and deodorant. Well, in the text it says flowers. I mean, we don't really attach flowers so much to our body any longer, but we use creams, and there's like a whole industry that's providing all these all these kind of, liquids and creams and what have you to beautify the body. But that's not really making the body clean. And that's like, Aryadeva argues, like, it's like saying you lose your nose and you're totally happy about the substitute gold nose, right? You kind of attach this weird nose and you're believing this is even better than the real thing. I've got like whatever that nose looks like, some substitute gold nose that you attach to your face, and you're so happy about it. Well, here we're believing the body to be pure because we put all these this stuff on it and believe it to be pure now, but that is just covering up what's actually there. So again, this sense, oh, this person's body is clean. And I'm saying just get in touch with your own attachment, your craving, where there's like, oh, this is so clean, this is so beautiful, this is perfect. Yeah. So getting in touch with that. And then 74, it reads, it is inappropriate to call clean that towards which freedom from desire arises, nor is there anything which is a definite cause of desire. So it is inappropriate, therefore, to call the body clean, since those who are liberated are free from desire for the body and see its actual qualities, right? So towards those who've actually gained freedom, well, they see how this desire arises and they're free from that kind of desire. Also, there's no thing that is a definite cause of desire. Because flowers, for instance, or certain substances that people consider to be always clean, I mean, they're not, because they wither. They also go out of existence. They become ugly. So even flowers are not perfect. And practitioners have no desire for them. Therefore, kind of sounds so for those who are free from desire towards certain things, it's not appropriate to call these things still to be clean. So for a practitioner, for someone who's attained liberation, they would not have desire for a body or for a flower or anything. So none of those objects, once you've attained liberation, there's no desire. So it's not appropriate for someone who's not liberated to have desire for them either, because there are none of these clean subjects, clean objects. Well, the thing was, Maya's question now with regard to a Buddha, for instance. Well, what about the qualities of a Buddha? Well, is a Buddha unclean in that sense? Well, the thing is, of course, there's a difference between ordinary objects, objects that are considered to be the result of our karma and afflictions, so the ordinary world we live in. And then objects such as, well, a Buddha's mind, a Buddha's body, which arises as a result of the pure, well, meditation that a bodhisattva initially engaged in, and then the resultant state of a Buddha. So that would not be considered unclean. And it's actually said that afflictive emotions cannot arise towards someone who's totally purified the mind of any kind of misconception. And so having desire for a Buddha, for instance, it's not even possible. We don't perceive the Buddha for who he or she is. Why? Because there's attachment towards them. So it's just not perceiving it for what it actually is, not perceiving, having some kind of other idea of who the Buddha is. And so it's also not possible to get angry with the Buddha if you really perceive the Buddha. So none of these afflictions can actually work versus the objects. And that's also quite important. Like, we differentiate between samsara in terms of, well, there are actually two aspects. Samsara is usually described as a container and the content. So there's this expression in Tibetan. Samsara refers to the environment as well as the beings within. So container is the environment and the beings within. Now, when you say environment, we think of samsara actually much more, and usually, strictly speaking, it refers to the five aggregates, body and mind. But then what about the external world we live in? Now, that's a little bit trickier, because actually there is no objective world out there. There is no objective container as such. And likewise, there's no objective body, there's nothing that exists subjectively. There only exists a subjective world there. And it is said, for instance, to give you an example, when I eat if I eat some food, that kind of food, if I take that food and I consider that to be disgusting, now the food I experience, if they take that same morsel of food and they give it to a Buddha and the Buddha eats it, it will be automatically blissful, because the Buddha experiences it differently. So, in other words, we all experience different objects, which also accounts for the fact, for instance, if you have a bowl of liquid, to a human being, it's perceived as water, to a preta being, it's perceived as pus and blood, to a celestial being, is perceived as nectar. So, it may be perceived in all cases as a liquid, but everyone perceives it differently. So there's no objective. That shows us there's no objective. There's not even an objective bowl of liquid that is just perceived differently. No, there's just similarity that in all cases there is the karma to perceive a liquid, but due to the karmic individual, the differences, it is perceived differently. So subjectively differently. Therefore, our perception of reality is influenced by our state of mind, by our afflictive emotions. And so when I perceive a piece of food, when I experience a piece of food, well, that accords with the karmic potential that I have created, or the karmic result I experience now as a human being. In fact, every experience I have is the result of an action in the past. So I have different experiences from moment to moment, and I create the causes for new experiences. But they're all within samsara. They're all limited. They're all limited and therefore not clean and pure the way I may look at them. But because they're all the result of my afflictive emotions, my misconception of reality, they cannot be pure because they're just just an expression of my own mind. They're a subjective experience of my own mind. While a Buddha has totally eliminated those obstructions, those limitations to the mind, and whatever is experienced with this purity. And it has that purity for a Buddha. That's the reality of a Buddha, while my reality is very different. Now, when I now perceive a Buddha, I cannot perceive a Buddha for who he or she, or it's even hard to use words such as he and she. So the point is, I cannot perceive a Buddha for what he or she really is. I perceive my own version and I react accordingly with desire, with attachment, and so forth. However, depending on my karma, how obstructed I am, I may still be able to perceive these incredible qualities and be inspired. So it's still important to have them around, even though I don't see them for who they are. And so when they manifest to us in this really beautiful, with this beautiful body and so forth, if I have the karma to see that, well, it will still benefit me just being inspired by something beautiful, even though I may react with anger, with attachment, with desire. Though it actually I'm less likely to do that because the causes and conditions were so pure. So the Buddha manifesting, they came from this purity, so that's less likely that this happens. But for some people, this still happens. I mean, some people look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama and see him as a pure devil. It's so hard to believe, but I'm sure there's some people in the Chinese government who believe His Holiness to be a devil. I'm sure also in some other organizations where they believe His Holiness to be truly evil, believing that a certain deity that they worship, to be a Buddha, and His Holiness to be a devil. I mean, there's no limit to people's views of reality. But the point I'm trying to make is that a Buddha manifests still in a way that for us we're more likely to perceive as attractive, or attractive in the sense of like inspiring, so in a positive way, as to inspire us. And it's of course within the limitation of our mind, but understanding those limitations, understanding what we can perceive, a Buddha is able to manifest in the best possible way. However, unless we're Buddhas ourselves, we will never fully realize the extent of Buddha's abilities, but we will get closer. As we progress in our practice, we'll get a better understanding of what Buddhahood is, which is necessary, because otherwise we won't be determined to reach that state, because we have no idea what it's like. We want to be able to understand. So it's a process of purifying the mind and understanding better and better the actual qualities of a Buddha, which these qualities, as I say, these qualities are totally pure, free from any misconception and so forth. And therefore, they can influence us in a positive way. Okay, but still our hindrances, our obscurations will still hinder us from seeing the Buddha for who they really are. But that's the greatest benefit we can receive from them, even though it's limited. All right, I hope I answered that question, um, um, Maya. If not, you're welcome to ask again. All right. Now, therefore, um, yes, even flowers, just limited flowers and so forth. I mean, they're not perceived by someone who's totally free from all obscurations as something pure in and of themselves. All right. So, in summary, all four, that is, impermanence, uncleanness, suffering, and selflessness, are possible with regard to a single thing. So, it's possible to have something that is impermanent and unclean in the nature of suffering and selfless. That is possible. So those are the qualities that are described basically in the first four chapters, and they are so important in that our misperception of them is one of the main causes for our problems. Okay, we're not in tune with impermanence. We're not in tune with the fact that the objects we consider to be pure and giving us lasting pleasure, well, that they're not in that nature, then in fact they're in the nature of suffering, as the third qualities indicates. And of course, we don't understand its nature of being selfless, of its actual nature. So those are described in those first four chapters. Well, selflessness is only on a coarser level in the fourth chapter, and then the last 8 chapters, of course, very extensively. So these are possible with regard to one thing. And then 76. Oh no, we're done here. Of course, we're done with this chapter. Right. I forgot it's only 5 verses at the end. So we may be able to finish those 100 verses altogether. 75. Okay. Now, should we meditate again? Okay, let's just go on to the next, and then we do a little bit meditation just to start a little bit, finish off with the next meditation on those verses, but go a little bit into the next chapter, bringing the two together. Here, the next chapter, it's called here abandoning pride or abandoning arrogance. I prefer the word arrogance because there is a Tibetan word pride, which actually means self-confidence. So there's a word for self-confidence, there's a word for pride. I'm proud of that person, I'm proud of myself, and those are not considered to be negative. And then there's arrogance, and that's considered to be negative. So I prefer to use the word pride instead of arrogance. So just for you to know that here pride refers to arrogance, and I'll explain that. And it's actually the name of this chapter is literally abandoning the belief in a self. But it's just a course form where we basically deal with the afflictive emotion that most obviously believes in a separate self, which is arrogance, believing ourselves to be superior to others. So a sense of self-importance, a self of arrogance. And even though we may believe, and we probably are considered to be humble by other people, 100% we have that arrogance. We always have. As long as we have that misconception, we have a form of arrogance, which is to most people just not obvious because we all have a certain level of them, so therefore it may not be recognized as arrogance by others, but we all do have it, and this is a beautiful way to recognize it. And again, as in the previous chapter, when we talk about craving, the strongest type of craving, the craving, sexual craving, is described. Here also the strongest type of arrogance is described, that of a king. It's like of a ruler who believes they're so powerful and so almighty, and people, bow to them, and they believe they're so great. Now, we need to also bring this to other aspects. That's important, that we're not kings, we're not rulers. Well, we're kings of our own castle, so we may have that pride at home at some point. That's possible. But just in our interaction with other people. With the previous chapter, we haven't done it much, but just because there wasn't that much time, and we could still relate to what it says in chapter 3. But of course, we can apply this to the objects we possess certain things we're attached to, such as our possessions, considering them to be truly wonderful, truly beautiful. We see them in a kind of similar way. It's just not as obvious because the craving is not so strong as in the case of the craving for another person. But it's all a matter of bringing it into that situation. I mean, like also transferring it to the craving for our possessions, the things we're attached to. But here it's well, this type of arrogance. So, like I said, it's a little bit hard initially, like we're not kings and so forth, but this text helps us to recognize our own arrogance, our own holding that we're just a little bit more special than others. Sometimes it's harder with these verses to recognize, sometimes it's easier. So I'll just read the first verse and then we'll start meditating. Who that is wise? So whoever is wise about worldly existence would be arrogant. So what person would be wise about worldly existence? What person would be who's wise about worldly existence would be arrogant, thinking I and mine. So someone who really understands how I and mine exist, a practitioner. So it was understood the reality of I and mine. Why would they be arrogant, thinking I and mine? For all things belong equally to all embodied beings. So we may actually have arrogance and well, yeah, have a sense of self-importance with regard to having control over particular things, having control over a country, having control, believing this is mine. But actually, there's nothing that belongs to me. I mean, even if I have lots of possessions, well, these possessions in a different form belong to other people in a different life. So for some time, I may hold on to them, but they're made of molecules and atoms and so forth. And these atoms and molecules, they formed other objects in the past that were owned by other people. So if we think about it, the things we own, well, maybe even the money we own, once we're dead, this money goes to someone else. And if the money existed before we were born, money that was printed like a long time ago, it belonged to someone else. It keeps changing hands. And still we kind of believe this is mine. It's always been mine, but it's belonged to other people at some point. And in fact, it's equally been, possessed by so many beings. So what are we so proud of in terms of I and mine? It belongs to me. I have these possessions. All right. Anyway, as I said, I'd like to do another meditation before we have the break. We've got another 13 minutes. Just to do a little bit more of the verses we haven't gone through, which still is part of the chapter 3, and then we'll do a little bit the first verse of chapter 4. All right. So again, as before, we'll start with some breathing meditation, mindfulness of the breath. So now, having thought about attachment, craving for another person, well, the similar craving, we have the same attachment, similar attachment we have towards our own body. And we actually spend so much time keeping this body clean, inside and outside. Through diet, possible detoxification, through washing it, cleansing the skin. We don't pay much attention about the environment that is polluted by the substances of our body. But we're greatly focused on the cleanliness of our body itself. But our body is just as unclean as the body of other people. So instead of craving the body of another man or another woman, we should consider these men and women to be precious, but not due to their bodies, but due to their mental qualities and their mental potential. We should work towards reducing our craving for other people and enhancing our cherishing, truly valuing other sentient beings, men and women alike. Understanding the limitations of our body and other beings' body that cannot be remedied by external substances such as creams and deodorants. Those are totally artificial and not really able to purify something that is in the nature of suffering. Therefore, samsaric objects are the result of basic misconceptions of reality and other afflictive emotions, which is why they're always limited and never as faultless as our craving may suggest. Hence, it's important that Right now, our existence, our mind and body, and the mind and body of other beings were not liberated like ourselves. They're impermanent, not pure. They're in the nature of suffering and selfless. And having these attributes, therefore, it's important to remember that there's no truly existent I or mine. No I that can be found, and no objects that belong to me, since I only possess the things that I do possess for a short time before I give them up and they belong to someone else. And if there is no truly existent I and mine, arrogance and conceit do not make any sense. Feeling more important, more precious than others. So now to conclude this short analytical meditation, now apply the stabilizing meditation and single-pointedly focus on any insight you've gained. And allow this insight to sink deeper into your mental continuum. Now also let's make sure that we dedicate, of course, whatever positive potential we've accumulated before we dedicate in the afternoon, just a session this morning. Dedicate whatever positive potential as a group we accumulated reflecting on and meditating on these verses, thereby bringing them into our own life, mainly towards our own enlightenment. Our own enlightenment that enables us to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings, for whose sake we're mainly engaging in these practices. But that's also dedicated towards those who are facing great problems and difficulties right now. May this positive potential reduce their problems. For instance, Tali Lubin, who's sick right now. So may she get completely well due to the positive potential we've accumulated. Let's dedicate it towards her and everyone else who's sick. Okay, so that should be enough. This evening we of course do a longer dedication, so recite the prayers, but for now that's enough. And well, enjoy your lunch, and I'll see you again in an hour. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I can't say. Okay.